Story number 1. The station that never closes. I'd been driving for nearly 12 hours when I finally saw the sign, a ragged, flickering neon arrow pointing off the highway, accompanied by words that read gas and food, open 24/7. It was close to midnight, maybe later. My eyes felt like sandpaper. Every joint in my body ached, and even my coffee had long since grown cold. I needed a break, desperately. The highway was nearly empty, just me in the endless dark, nothing for miles except broken guardrails and the black silhouettes of scraggly trees. The lights of that gas station felt like a beacon of mercy. I had no idea I was driving straight into a nightmare. My name is Carl Walters. I'm a 32-year-old truck driver, well, sort of. I'd quit my job 2 weeks prior and was driving cross-country to see if there was anything left in my tank, so to speak. I was restless, my life stuck in a loop, and I thought an aimless road trip might help me find some direction. Instead, I found a place that should not exist, a place that clings to the night like a parasite. I'm not even sure what state I was in. Somewhere out west, the desert creeping in. The sign for the gas station stood by a lonely exit, just a bare asphalt ramp leading to a wide stretch of empty land. I flicked on my high beams, coasting toward a row of pumps illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights that hummed incessantly. It looked old, the kind of station that might have been modern 30 or 40 years ago, but now just hung on by virtue of being the only thing around for countless miles. The windows were dusty, the overhead canopy rust-stained. As I rolled to a stop, I noticed something odd right away, not a single other car, no sign of traffic. At a 24/7 gas station on an interstate highway, you'd expect at least a stray sedan or another tired trucker. But it was deserted. My eyes swept the pumps. A single sign flickered, cashier inside. Fine, I thought. Maybe it was a dead stretch of road. I parked at pump number 3, switched off my engine, and got out. The cool night air brushed across my skin, raising goosebumps. Or maybe that was something else, a sense of unease that clenched my stomach. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed louder as I walked toward the store. A hand-painted banner above the door read, "Hot coffee inside." The letters were chipped, the paint flaking. Under the harsh light, I noticed the windows were covered with some sort of mesh from the inside, obscuring the view. The door itself squeaked loudly when I pulled it open. I nearly gasped at the brightness within. Inside, the smell of stale coffee and old vinyl assaulted me. The store was empty except for a single attendant leaning on the counter, arms crossed, wearing a faded red uniform shirt that might have once borne a brand logo. He was middle-aged, maybe early 50s, gaunt cheeks, eyes sunken, hair thinning on top. He had a name tag that read Dell. The second I walked in, he fixed me with a stare so intense it felt like a physical blow. I forced a smile, nodding politely. "Evening." He didn't speak right away, just kept staring like he was reading my every thought. The silence stretched awkwardly. I cleared my throat, scanning the store shelves. They were half empty, a mishmash of dusty snacks and random automotive supplies. Finally, he said, "You heading west?" His voice rasped like sandpaper. Something about the hush of the place made me keep my own voice low. "Yeah. Just needed gas, maybe coffee." He paused, then nodded curtly. "We got that," he murmured. "But, best hurry. Night's nearly over." His words didn't make sense. I glanced at my watch, 12:27 a.m. technically, night had hours left. But Dell just watched me, unblinking. A chill crawled up my neck. I tried to focus on practicalities. "Right. Let me fill up, and I'll pay inside. Then I might grab coffee for the road." He pressed his lips together. "Better do it quick," he said quietly. "And don't stray from your vehicle. Don't leave it unoccupied. Especially not after midnight." I frowned, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "What?" Dell's eyes flicked toward the dusty windows. "Just pay attention to that. Don't walk away from your car once you start pumping. And for God's sake, don't wander around." My heart thudded. Was this some weird local superstition? Or a strange robbery scam? The vibe in that store was suffocating. My exhaustion twisted with anxiety. "Okay," I managed. Thanks for the tip. He nodded solemnly. When you're done, come in, pay fast, then drive off. Understand? Part of me wanted to argue, but something in his tone was so earnest, so urgent, that I just nodded. Sure. I backed out, the door squeaking shut behind me. Outside, the darkness felt deeper, the fluorescent glow casting sharp shadows across the pavement. My old sedan glinted under the artificial light. I popped open the fuel cap and grabbed the pump nozzle, slotting it in. As the gas flowed with a steady hum, I kept watch on the silent road behind me, half expecting some threat. Nothing moved, though. The desert stretched on, indifferent. The tank filled. I put the nozzle back, replaced the cap. At that moment, I heard a faint sound, like a distant moan carried on the wind. It was so soft I couldn't be sure. My pulse quickened. The hair on my arm stood up. I tossed a glance at the station store. Dell was pressed against the glass, watching me, face drawn in warning. He tapped his wrist, as if urging me to hurry. I jogged inside, the door banging against the frame. Dell was behind the counter, eyes flicking from me to the empty highway. He gestured for me to come closer. $35.70, he muttered, referencing the cost. I dug out my wallet. My hands trembled slightly. As I handed him cash, I found myself blurting, "Is there something wrong out here?" He snatched the bills, rang up the transaction. "Nothing for you if you drive away now," he said cryptically. "But if you linger, or if you set foot away from your car after midnight," he trailed off. A shudder ran through him. "They'll come." Anxious heat prickled my scalp. "Who?" He pressed his lips together. For a second, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he croaked, "They come from the desert. The fields beyond. Things that move in the shadows, hungry for those who wander. Used to be folks traveled this highway all hours, but now nobody dares pass through at night. Except newcomers who don't know better. That's why this station never closes. We watch, we warn. We do what we can." My heart hammered. This had to be a prank or a local urban legend. But the desperation in his eyes, it was all too convincing. "What do they do?" I whispered. He shook his head. "You don't want to find out." He glanced at the clock. "It's nearly past. Please, get in your car and go. Don't stop again until you're miles away. Keep your doors locked." I swallowed hard. Part of me wanted to argue, demand proof. But I remembered that eerie moan, the uneasy hush. Fear churned in my gut. "Okay," I finally said. "Thank you." He nodded stiffly. "Godspeed." He gestured at the scuffed door. "Now hurry." I rushed out, forcing myself not to look at the yawning darkness beyond the pumps. My sedan's engine turned over with a reassuring rumble. I fastened my seatbelt, my hands shaking. Then I pulled onto the empty highway, headlights slicing through the gloom. The station receded in my rearview mirror, the neon sign flickering like a dying star. In normal circumstances, that would be the end of it, just a bizarre story about a weird gas station clerk. But life isn't so simple. Because about 10 miles later, my car started sputtering. My eyes bulged in disbelief. I'd just filled the tank. There was no reason for a stall. Yet the engine coughed, the power flickered. I cursed, gripping the wheel, foot pressed on the gas. The needle on my fuel gauge sank rapidly, as though the gas were draining away. Within a minute, the engine died completely, leaving me coasting in near silence. I steered to the shoulder, tires crunching gravel. My heart hammered with dread. This was exactly the scenario Dell had warned me against, being stranded on this highway, after midnight, away from my car. Or forced to wander from it. I took a shaky breath, scanning the surroundings. Nothing but pitch-black desert. The moon was a faint sliver behind thin clouds. Could I call AAA? My phone had no signal. Just my luck. I tried restarting the engine, pumping the pedal, but it refused to turn over. The battery was fine, the light still glowed. So maybe the fuel system had a leak or a clog. Great. I cursed under my breath, remembering Dell's eerie warning. They come from the desert, he'd said. A chill crawled up my spine. Time passed. 10 minutes, maybe more. No cars. I was alone. The highway might as well have been abandoned. I considered my options: wait in the car until morning or walk back to the station. I recalled Dell's dire warning about leaving your car. Then again, the station was only 10 miles behind me, though it felt like an impossible distance on foot in the middle of the night. But if I stayed put, who knew how long until sunrise or until help arrived? My mind whirled. I flicked the overhead dome light on, rummaged in the glove box for anything useful. A flashlight, a half-charged portable phone charger, a map. Not much else. A nudge of panic pressed at the edges of my thoughts. I decided to remain in the car for a bit longer, see if by some miracle a passing motorist would appear. The minutes dragged. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it again, a low moan drifting from the darkness. My chest tightened. Could it be wind? An animal call? But as I listened, it grew louder, more like a chorus of soft, mournful cries. My hands clenched the steering wheel. Something was out there, beyond the asphalt. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Without conscious decision, I flipped my headlights off, not wanting to draw attention. Stupid or not, I felt safer hidden by darkness. The moans wavered, shifting in pitch. Then came a hush, followed by a gentle scraping sound, like claws on gravel. I fought the urge to hyperventilate, peering through the windshield. The night was starless, the desert a formless black. Then I saw movement, faint shapes flickering at the edge of my vision, too quick to identify. They seemed to circle. Dell's words crashed into my mind: "Don't leave your car." Right. I locked all doors, rolled up the windows, fumbled for the flashlight. The scraping sound intensified, coming from the passenger side. I turned, shining the flashlight. Through the window, I thought I glimpsed a figure, pale, elongated arms pressed to the glass. Or was it a trick of the light? A distortion of my reflection? Suddenly, something thumped against the car. I stifled a scream. The whole sedan shook slightly, as if a weight had landed on the trunk. My heart hammered like a jackhammer. Then, as quickly as it came, the pressure vanished. Another moan, closer this time, directly behind me. I spun, shining the flashlight through the rear window. Nothing. Or was that a shifting silhouette, sliding away? I realized these things were toying with me, testing. My mind reeled with panic. If they wanted in, could they break the glass? Dell said the car would keep me safe. Did he mean it literally, or was that just a guess? I had to do something. My best bet was to get back to the station. Sure, it was 10 miles, but maybe my adrenaline could carry me. Alternatively, I could pray for dawn, trapped here until first light. Another thump on the hood. I jerked forward. Through the windshield, the flashlight revealed a shape crouching on the metal, fingers splayed. My stomach twisted. It was vaguely human in outline, but impossibly thin, limbs stretched longer than normal, skin dull gray under the beam. It had no visible eyes, just dark pits. It pressed its face, if you could call it that, to the glass, mouth a ragged hole. A raspy hiss emitted from it, fogging the windshield. My breath lodged in my throat, a silent scream. Without thinking, I slammed my hand against the horn. A blaring sound erupted, startling both me and the creature. It recoiled, sliding off the hood. That gave me a split second to act. My body moved on autopilot. I flung open the driver's door, directly contradicting Dell's warning, and dashed onto the highway. In the back of my mind, I knew this was madness, but staying pinned inside seemed worse if they could break in. I ran. The pavement blurred under my feet. My only plan, sprint back toward the station. 10 miles was a lot, but maybe there'd be a passing car. Anything. The night air pummeled my face. Behind me, I heard shrill cries and scrambling footfalls. A nauseating certainty took hold. They were chasing me. I risked a glance back. Under the faint glow of my flashlight, I saw multiple figures loping on all fours, spindly arms and legs propelling them forward. Their mouths hung open in silent howls, their gray bodies flickering in and out of view like ghosts. Fear gave me wings, my stride long and desperate. Darkness swallowed the highway. I had no sense of distance, just my flashlight's narrow beam and the pounding of my heart. The shapes darted at the edges of the light, never fully entering the beam. Their moans echoed like a twisted chorus. My lungs burned, sweat drenching my skin. But adrenaline kept me going. Each step might be my last if I stumbled or slowed. The highway stretched on, merciless. The only landmark was the faint hum of blood in my ears and the echoes of those creatures. Then, dimly, I saw a flicker of light in the distance. The station's neon sign, miles away. Could I truly make it? My legs felt like lead. But the alternative was certain death. Time lost meaning. I ran until my lungs threatened to burst, ignoring cramps. The moans behind me rose, then fell back, as if they were hurting me. Maybe they toyed with their prey, savoring the chase. My flashlight began to flicker, battery dying. Panic surged. I gave one last burst of speed, ignoring the pain in my calves. Finally, blessedly, the station's canopy lights came into view. My vision blurred, but I recognized the shape of the building, the pumps glowing under fluorescent tubes. I was maybe half a mile away. The creatures were closer now, their panting breaths audible. Summoning every scrap of will, I pushed on. My chest felt like it would explode. Up ahead, a figure stood by the pumps, Dell, waving frantically, yelling something I couldn't make out. I forced myself forward, the asphalt under my shoes like molten lead. The moans crescendoed. My flashlight died completely, plunging me into near blackness. Only the station lights guided me. 30 yards. 20. 10. My vision swam. Dell grabbed my arm, yanking me into the station's perimeter of fluorescent glare. I collapsed onto the concrete, gasping, tears streaming down my cheeks. He snapped, "Get inside." My limbs barely functioned, but he hauled me to my feet, propelling me through the station door. Once inside, he slammed it shut, locking it. Then he dashed to the windows, securing heavy steel shutters. I sank to the floor, mind reeling. From outside, we heard furious screeches, like nails on metal, rattling the shutters. My entire body shook. Dell knelt beside me, face grim. You made it," he said, voice taut. "But your car?" I closed my eyes, tears leaking. My voice quavered. "Stalled." He closed his eyes. "Damn. That means you're stuck here until dawn." "We both are." I stared at him blankly. He stood, heading behind the counter. "Station is reinforced," he continued, voice hollow. "Used to be we had more folks manning it, but," he trailed off. A horrifying realization sank in. The station was a fortress of sorts, built to withstand these nocturnal horrors. Why don't you close it at night?" I asked, voice trembling. He gave a bleak laugh. "We tried closing. But travelers still came off the highway, ignorant. Then they died alone outside, no help. So we keep it open, hoping to save whoever stumbles in, at least warn them." My mind swirled, exhaustion hitting me like a sledgehammer. Outside, the creatures scratched and moaned, their fury palpable. Dell pulled out a battered thermos, poured me some water, insisted I drink. I gulped it gratefully, my throat on fire. We hunkered down behind the counter, lights overhead flickering. Every so often, the creatures slammed against the metal shutters, making the store's interior vibrate. The hours crept by in a haze of dread. Dell explained in hushed tones that these beings had haunted the region for decades, maybe centuries. Some said they were cursed spirits, others claimed alien origins. Whatever they were, they preyed on anyone who ventured on foot after midnight. Eventually, the horizon began to lighten. I saw it through a small gap in the shutters, a faint glow of dawn. The creatures' attacks waned, their moans fading into the distance. By the time sunlight fully broke, the station felt like a tomb, quiet and still, both of us battered by fear. Dell unbarred the door. Golden light spilled in, chasing away the ghosts of the night. We stepped outside, scanning the lot. No sign of the creatures, only scratches on the concrete, odd footprints in the dust. My body ached, every muscle protesting. Dell gestured to an old tow truck parked behind the station. "We'll go get your car," he offered. "Bring it back. Maybe fix it enough so you can leave before night falls again." I nodded, voice shaky with gratitude. "Thank you." He climbed into the truck, and I joined him. We rumbled down the highway. In daylight, the road looked desolate but harmless, the desert stretching in serene emptiness. We found my sedan half buried in dust, the windows splattered with handprints, dark smears from the creatures. I shuddered at the memory. With silent efficiency, Dell hooked it up to the tow. We hauled it back, working quickly under the relentless sun to diagnose the engine problem. Turned out the fuel line was sabotaged, maybe a sharp slash from those things. Dell patched it. By late afternoon, it was drivable, though not perfect. Dell insisted I refill the tank. The entire time, I felt an impending clock ticking. Once darkness fell, the horrors would return. I had no desire to see them again. Dell refused any payment, just gave me a grim smile. "Just keep driving until you're far from here," he said. "And if you see someone heading this way after dark, warn them." I thanked him profusely, tears in my eyes. He gave my shoulder a brief squeeze. "We do what we can," he murmured, repeating that line. Then he handed me a sheet of paper scrawled with directions. "Alternate route," he said. "Takes you around the cursed land. It's longer, but safer." I nodded, clutching it like a lifeline. Without further delay, I climbed into my sedan, heart pounding. The sun was sinking, shadows stretching. I drove off, watching the station shrink in my rearview mirror. A surge of relief mingled with guilt. Dell would stay behind, manning that lonely outpost, always open, forever warning travelers of the nightmare lurking just off the highway. Even now, months later, I can't shake the memory of that night. The way the creatures moved, the near-silent moans, the terror of seeing one crouched on my hood. The knowledge that a single gas station stands between weary drivers and unspeakable doom. Whenever I see an open 24/7 sign, I remember Dell's hollow eyes and the faint scratch of claws on metal shutters. I remember how that station never closes, not because business is good, but because someone has to stand guard against the nightmares that come after midnight. I still have nightmares, though. In them, I'm back on that highway, engine sputtering, darkness closing in. Sometimes I see Dell's face in my dreams, urging me forward. Sometimes I see the creatures, their jaws gaping, arms elongated to impossible lengths. I always wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding. Because I know, out there in the desert, they're still waiting, the station still stands, and another unsuspecting traveler might ignore the warnings and step out of their car after midnight, becoming just another scream in the darkness. That's my story. If you ever find yourself on a lonely stretch of highway at night, and you see a gas station that never closes, remember, the lights inside may be your only salvation. The clerk might be more than a board attendant, he could be the thin line between you and those that roam the cursed land. And if he tells you to stay in your car, you listen. Listen well, or you might find yourself the next victim of the station that never closes. Story number 2. The gas station for the lost. I remember it so vividly, the highway stretching out under a moonless sky, the headlights of our beat-up SUV carving a narrow path of visibility through the blackness. My name is Alex Reynolds, and I was part of a group of college friends on a final summer road trip before life inevitably pulled us in different directions. We'd set out that morning with backpacks stuffed and hearts hopeful for an adventure, but somewhere along a backroad intersection, we missed a crucial turn. By nightfall, we realized we were thoroughly lost. Little did we know we were about to find something far worse than a wrong turn. We were about to stumble on a place that shouldn't exist, a place that seemed summoned by our confusion and fear. There were 4 of us in total, me, Dylan, Jess, and Miranda. We'd been best friends since freshman year, forging a bond over shared classes and late-night Netflix binges. This trip was supposed to be our last big hurrah, a meandering trek across the country with no fixed itinerary, just a desire to see interesting sights and create memories. But now we found ourselves somewhere in the Southwest, on a deserted 2-lane blacktop, with no bars on our phones and no town name in sight. We'd been following what looked like a main route, but somehow it had deteriorated into a narrow asphalt strip lined by barren desert shrubs and scattered boulders. "It's gotta be this way," Dylan insisted, chewing on his lower lip as he peered at the battered map under the SUV's dome light. He was our self-appointed navigator, but the worry in his eyes told me he had no idea where we were. Jess, in the back seat, kept scanning her phone's blank screen, occasionally shaking it like that would magically summon a signal. Miranda, next to her, had fallen uncharacteristically quiet, drumming her fingers on the seat. And me, well, I tried to stay calm. "We'll find something eventually," I said, trying to project confidence. But the gnawing sense of dread in my gut whispered otherwise. This road was emptier than a ghost town, no other headlights, no signs of civilization. It felt like we were the only people alive in a world gone dark. Around midnight, the asphalt curved sharply, and in the distance, we saw a faint glow. Relief washed over us, finally, maybe a diner or a rest stop. But as we drew closer, our headlights revealed something else, a single gas station, old and dilapidated, perched at an odd angle near the side of the road. A rusted canopy jetted out over a pair of pumps that looked decades out of date, the type with spinning mechanical numbers behind glass. The sign overhead flickered weakly, casting jittery shadows across the cracked pavement. It read, "Gas station for the lost, open when you need it." The subheading, in peeling paint, said, "Only for those who stray." I read it aloud, my voice echoing in the stillness. A chill settled across us. "That's weird," Miranda breathed. Jess, behind me, muttered, "Are we that lost?" The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1950s. The windows were dusty, the paint on the walls chipped, a few battered signs tacked near the entrance. But the lights glowed invitingly, if you could call such a forlorn place inviting. The pumps were lit by a single flickering overhead bulb. No other cars. No sign of an attendant. But the neon sign in the store window read, "Open." "Better than nothing," Dylan said, exhaling. "We need gas anyway." "Yeah, but come on," Jess whispered. "This place looks off." She wasn't wrong. My nerves tingled with unease. But we had no better option. Our tank was running low, and we needed directions. I pulled the SUV up to the pump, engine idling. Outside, a faint breeze stirred the dust. Silence pressed in, thicker than the darkness. Reluctantly, we stepped out. A single overhead speaker played static-filled music, an old country tune I couldn't identify. The temperature felt colder here, despite the desert climate. And then we noticed something stranger, a small sign taped to the pump. It read in neat, old-fashioned handwriting, "Please come inside to pay. Cash only. You'll find what you need." I swallowed, my pulse thudding. Guess we gotta go in. We left Miranda by the car, engine still running. Jess and Dylan followed me to the door. Jess grumbled about wishing she had cell service to check the place's reviews. Dylan gave a nervous laugh. We all recognized the situation, a creepy gas station in the middle of nowhere, and we were dumb kids walking right into it. If it were a horror movie, we'd be screaming at ourselves. But we were tired, short on options, and maybe too arrogant to suspect real danger. I pushed the door open. A bell tinkled overhead. The interior was surprisingly well lit by fluorescent tubes that buzzed faintly. Rows of shelves held dusty snacks, postcards, random trinkets. A small counter stood at the far end, behind which was a wall covered in pinned-up photographs. My attention snagged on them immediately. But before I could look closer, a voice called out from behind a shelf. "Evening, folks. Trouble on the road?" We turned, seeing a tall, thin man in a stained white shirt. He was older, late 60s, maybe, skin weather-beaten, with silver hair slicked back. He had the name AL embroidered on his pocket. He offered a crooked smile that never reached his eyes. Yeah, I said, clearing my throat. "We got lost. And we're low on gas." He nodded. "Happens all the time out here. This station's for folks like you." The way he said that made a prickle run down my spine. "You can fill up, sure." He gestured to the shelves. "We have snacks, supplies. Whatever you need." We exchanged glances. Dylan asked, "So, do you take credit cards?" "Cash only," Al replied, as if that were obvious. I grimaced. Jess fished in her purse. We pooled what bills we had. "We've only got about $60, she said. "That'll do," Al said quietly. Then he added, "If you'd like a map, I have some. Over there on the wall." He pointed to a rack near the photos. We stepped closer, and that was when we truly noticed them, dozens, maybe hundreds, of small Polaroids or old snapshots taped or pinned to a corkboard that spanned the entire back wall. Each photo showed a person or a group of people. Different eras, different fashions, some in black and white, others in faded color. I felt a weird rush of dread. Many of these faces wore uneasy smiles, like they'd been caught off guard. Dylan's voice wavered. What is this?" Al approached from behind, footsteps silent on the linoleum. "Folks who came through here, once upon a time. Many of them were travelers like you, lost, out of luck. The station gave them what they needed." The hair on my neck bristled. "And why are they missing?" The word missing slipped out unbidden, but that's what it felt like. The entire collage radiated sorrow. Several photos had names scrawled on them, or dates. Some dated back to the 1970s, others even older. Al shrugged. "This is a special station," he said cryptically. "Only opens for those who stray from their path. We keep a record of who passes through." Jess's face paled. "A record? For what reason?" Al's grin tightened. "So we don't forget. Now, come on." He turned away. "Let's settle your gas, give you a map. Then you'll be on your way." Unease coiled in my gut. This felt more ominous by the second. But we needed the fuel. Dylan, apparently the bravest among us, asked, "So you're saying you only open for lost travelers? That can't be real." Al paused, his eyes glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Is it so hard to believe? The world is bigger than you know. Sometimes you wander off the main road and find places that shouldn't be. But they are. They're waiting for the lost." I swallowed, forcing a laugh. "That's a bit dramatic, right?" No answer. The hush in the store felt suffocating. Then the door banged open, and Miranda rushed in, face ashen. She gasped, "You guys, something's weird outside." Al's head snapped toward her. "What is it, child?" he asked, though his tone lacked true curiosity. Miranda trembled, eyes wide. I walked around to look for a bathroom and saw a sign behind the station. It says, "This gate opens only once." My stomach dropped. Another cryptic message. Jess whispered, "What the hell does that mean?" Al exhaled, like a teacher tired of explaining. "It means once you enter, you don't leave the same way. The station's a gateway, you see. Something beyond your normal roads. People who come here rarely find their way back." A chill froze my limbs. "Stop messing with us." He lifted a brow. "Wish I were." Dylan yanked out the cash, slamming it on the counter. "Listen, we just want gas, a map, and we're gone. Whatever game you're playing, just let us go." Al took the money, nodded. "I'll start the pump." He walked past us, out the door. We shared a fraught silence. Jess's breath hitched. "Guys, we should just fill up and get out. This place is giving me major creeps." I nodded, glancing again at the photos on the wall. My eye snagged on a face that looked eerily familiar, someone wearing clothes from maybe the 1990s, smiling uncertainly. A pinned note read, "Lost on June 12th, last seen here." The date was decades ago. My stomach churned. Did they never leave? Outside, Al was messing with the pump. We joined Miranda at the door. She pointed to a large sign near the building's side, partially obscured by shadows. I stepped out to read it. Painted in bold letters, "For those who stray, enter at your own risk." The door opens only once. Goosebumps prickled my arms. Al beckoned for us to bring the SUV around. Dylan complied, backing the vehicle closer to the single ancient pump. Al attached the nozzle, the mechanical counter spinning with a soft whir. All the while, an oppressive hush weighed on us, as though the desert itself held its breath. Once the tank was full, Al replaced the nozzle. "That's that. Hope you found what you needed." I frowned. "We need directions." "A map." He gestured behind him. "Inside." "One more thing to settle." Reluctantly, we followed him back in. He rounded the counter, pulling out a battered paper map from below. As he unfolded it, I saw that it didn't resemble any modern state map, no brand logos or highways clearly labeled. Instead, it depicted a strange crosshatch of lines and routes, with place names I didn't recognize. "Follow the red path," Al advised, his finger tracing a line. "It'll lead you back to the interstate. But be warned, once you drive away from here, the station disappears. You can't come back." Miranda's voice shook. "Fine by us. We never want to see this place again." AL's gaze flickered. "That's what everyone says." He handed the map to Dylan. "Now, each of you," he paused, glancing at me. "Give me your names. For the record." My mouth went dry. "No, we're good." He shrugged. "Suit yourself. But the station demands it. A tribute, if you will. That's how it knows you." Jess rolled her eyes, stepping forward. "Whatever. I'm Jess." She rattled off the others' names. My heart clenched with each one. Al nodded slowly, then took a Polaroid camera from under the counter. My stomach dropped. "Stand together," he said. "For our records." Dylan cursed under his breath. "We're not." But Al leveled an unblinking stare. "You want to leave, right?" A tense beat passed. I realized maybe the only way out was to play along. We huddled in front of the counter. Al snapped the Polaroid, the flash blinding me for a moment. He snatched the developing photo, shook it gently, then pinned it to an empty space on the corkboard. Another set of faces among the hundreds. A flick of dread rippled through me. "There," Al said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "Your place is marked." Jess's eyes glistened with anxiety. We're done, right?" Al gave a tight smile. "Yes. Now go. Before the station decides to keep you." My gut churned. "That's enough," I muttered, turning toward the door. Dylan and Jess followed, Miranda trailing behind, her face pale. We burst outside, the desert night pressing in. The station's lights flickered overhead, the sign reading, "Only for the lost, open when you need it." We piled into the SUV, hearts pounding. Dylan started the engine, clutching the ancient map Al had given us. "Let's get the hell out of here," he said. We peeled onto the lonely road, leaving the cursed station behind. For a few minutes, we drove in tense silence, scanning the map. Indeed, a red route was marked, weaving through uncharted terrain. "This doesn't look real," Jess whispered, scrutinizing the bizarre names and odd notes scrawled in the margins. "Barren Flats, River of Echoes, here be ghosts." But we had no better reference. Our phone still showed no signal. The night was dark as ink, the desert eerily still. After about 10 miles, the road seemed to shift, the asphalt crumbling, replaced by a cracked surface older than any highway I'd seen. The air grew thick, each breath heavy. My ears popped. "This is insane," Miranda hissed. "Are we sure we're going the right way?" Dylan's knuckles whitened on the wheel. "It's the only way, according to that lunatic's map." We pressed onward, the darkness almost tangible. My stomach twisted with the certainty that this wasn't normal land anymore. The station must have been some gateway, bridging our world and something else. The headlights illuminated a faint road sign, "Return is not guaranteed." The words hammered home our worst fears. Jess let out a small sob. I reached back to squeeze her hand. We had to stay calm, keep driving. Eventually, the road widened, forming a broad expanse that looked more like dried clay than asphalt. The SUV rumbled across it, dust swirling in the beams. The moon was high overhead, revealing a barren landscape that seemed endless. At the far side of that expanse loomed a shape, a massive arch, carved from stone or something older. It spanned the road like an ancient monument. Our hearts pounded as we approached. The map showed a red circle around this arch, labeled Doorway. My throat clenched. This was it. If the station had indeed brought us to another realm, this might be the threshold to return, or to vanish. The SUV's engine sputtered. Dylan cursed, hitting the gas. The arch drew closer, and I saw swirling symbols etched into the stone, faintly glowing under the moonlight. My hair stood on end. We crossed under the arch, our hearts seized with a terror that defied logic. For a split second, reality seemed to warp, my vision blurred, the sound of the engine distorted. Then, just like that, we were on an ordinary highway. The headlights reflected off crisp yellow lines on fresh asphalt. Overhead, a green sign read, Interstate 50, next town 10 miles. The air around us felt normal, no oppressive weight. My ears popped again, and the tension in my chest released. We burst into nervous laughter, tears of relief streaming down Jess's face. It was over. We were safe, or so we thought. We pulled off at the next exit, a normal, modern gas station with a convenience store chain I recognized. Our phones lit up with a flurry of missed signals. The world was back to normal. We stumbled inside, half delirious, ignoring the stares from the clerk who wondered why we looked so rattled. After we'd caught our breath, Dylan and I stepped aside, rummaging for the map. We wanted to see how it changed after crossing that arch. But it was gone. Not in the glove box, not in Dylan's pockets. Jess swore she saw it on the seat, but now it had vanished. A chill snaked through me. No proof of the station. No proof of the surreal route we'd just taken. I felt an urge to open the camera on my phone, but we'd taken no pictures. Except the station took one of us, pinned it to the wall among the missing. We parted ways the next day, returning to campus to finish our final weeks. The trip ended abruptly. We never told our families the full story, who would believe it? But nightmares plagued us, each in our own way. Jess dreamed of that corkboard, filled with 1,000 lost faces, including ours. Miranda refused to drive at night anymore. Dylan tried rationalizing it, blaming stress or group hallucinations. As for me, I sometimes rummage through my photos, hoping to find proof. There's none. Yet I can't shake the memory of AL's final words, the station decides who stays. Because sometimes, late at night, I see the reflection of my own face in the mirror, and I recall the same expression I saw in those photos pinned on the wall, an expression of someone who stumbled into a realm they weren't meant to see. Worse, I'm haunted by the thought that we didn't truly escape. Perhaps that desert station, or something behind it, marked us. We might have physically returned, but did a part of us remain in that place? Are we now living on borrowed time, heading toward an inevitable recall? I don't know. None of us do. All I know is that the gas station for the lost is out there, waiting in the darkness for the next hapless travelers to wander off their path. And if you, dear reader, ever find yourself on a lonely highway at midnight, spotting an old sign that says, "Open only once," please, turn around. Don't let curiosity lure you to that crumbling pump. Don't step inside for directions. Because once you see that corkboard of faces, once the station acknowledges your presence, there's no guarantee you will return. Some doors open only once, and some roads lead you to places from which no map can guide you home again. Story number 3. Receipt from the dead. I still remember the exact shade of orange sky as I pulled onto Route 17, the late sun dripping behind me like molten gold. The evening felt heavy, the air tense, as if something in the atmosphere had decided to hold its breath. My name is Jackson Cole, and on that September evening 10 years ago, I was making what was supposed to be a simple drive from Kansas to Colorado. If I'd known how dramatically my life would change, maybe I'd have taken a different road. Or maybe I wouldn't have gone at all. I had left work late, juggling last-minute tasks and a frustrating conference call. By the time I hopped in my old Jeep Cherokee, most folks were finishing dinner. The plan was to drive as far as I could before midnight, then crash in a roadside motel. It was a route I'd driven a handful of times, farmland and wide, flat roads that gave way to gentle hills, an endless horizon broken only by the occasional cluster of trees or a dimly lit farmstead. A couple of hours in, my gas gauge slid dangerously close to the quarter mark. I typically prided myself on planning stops, but exhaustion had me bleary-eyed and sloppy. Every station I passed was either closed or too sketchy to trust. Finally, just as dusk threatened to swallow the last vestiges of light, I spotted a single, flickering neon sign in the distance. It looked ancient, its colors smudged and flickering, but the letters spelled out gas. It seemed like a lifeline. With relief, I guided the Jeep off the highway onto a short gravel approach leading up to a small station perched near a field of tall grass. Right away, I noticed the place looked off. The windows were dusty, the overhead canopy for the pumps was half rusted, and the large overhead lights struggled to stay lit, popping and buzzing every few seconds. A battered sign read, Johnson's Fuel, EST 1977. No other cars in sight. Maybe it was a half-abandoned station. Still, the pumps looked intact, and a small open sign glowed in the window of the store. I debated skipping it. My instincts told me something about the place was wrong. But my Jeep needed gas, and I was too tired to keep pushing my luck. So I pulled up to the pumps, rolled down my window to sniff the air. There was a faint whiff of old fuel, but no fresh smell of gas. The evening had gone dark by then, a hush falling over the country road. My headlights cut across the dusty glass of the store, but I couldn't see much inside, just shapes of shelves. I killed the engine, hopped out. The gravel crunched under my boots. Despite the summer warmth, a chill prickled along my arms. The overhead lamp flickered, painting the station in strobing shadows. I told myself not to spook, maybe the place was just outdated and poorly maintained. I lifted the nozzle from the pump, discovering an old, squeaking metal lever I had to push to get the fuel flowing. The meter on the pump was mechanical, the kind with rolling numbers behind thick glass. They looked dusty, but the gas started flowing. Good enough. As I fueled up, I surveyed the building. The front door was glass, with a small "We're open" sign dangling crookedly. I glimpsed a counter inside, some candy displays. Everything looked stained by time. My eyes flicked to the single overhead bulb, noticing a large moth fluttering around it, banging itself repeatedly into the glass cover. The air felt oddly static, like a thunderstorm might be brewing, though the sky was empty of clouds. When the pump thumped to a stop, I slid the nozzle back. The short hiss of it returning to idle made me jump, my nerves were on edge. With a forced laugh at myself, I locked the Jeep and headed to the store to pay. The door's bell tinkled overhead. Inside, the place was dimmer than expected, fluorescent tubes overhead flickering in and out. The shelves had a sad array of snacks, most wrappers dusty, some chips puffed with stale air. A battered cooler hummed in the corner, containing what might have been expired sodas. It felt more like a museum of a gas station than a functional business. At the front was a small, old-fashioned register. Behind it, a tall young man with sandy hair and a faint scar near his eyebrow. He wore a pale blue uniform shirt that read Johnny's Fuel in faded script. Hardly matching the sign outside that said Johnson's, but maybe just a nickname. He gave me a quick, polite nod. "Help you, sir?" he asked, voice calm, almost eerily so. Yeah," I replied. "Just pumped some gas, about $30 worth, I think." The pump's meter said 29.57. He nodded, not bothering to check. "Sure thing." He reached under the counter, pulled out an old-school receipt pad, the kind with carbon copies. "Let me write that up for you." I found it strange. Usually, you just ring up the total. But this place looked older than old. Maybe the register was busted. I watched him jot notes on the pad, the pen scratching in the quiet. The overhead light flickered, revealing glimpses of the clerk's face in strobing half-light. His features were gaunt, eyes slightly shadowed. He tore off the top copy, offered it to me. "You can settle in cash." "I've no card machine." I fished out a couple of 20s, handed them over. He counted out my change with slow precision. "Thank you," he said softly. Then he slid the receipt across the counter. "You want to hang on to that, Mr. Cole." A chill shot through me. He spoke my name, though I hadn't given it. My mouth went dry. How do you? He cut me off with a wry half-smile. We keep track of folks who pass through. Helps to remember who's been by. He lifted a shoulder in a shrug. I'm Tom, by the way. Confused and uneasy, I glanced at his name tag. No label, just a patch. I managed a nod. So, yeah, well, thanks, Tom. Have a good night. He said nothing further, just watched me. I turned away, heart thumping. The second I reached the door, a sudden wave of dread made me freeze. I couldn't explain it. My instincts screamed that something was severely wrong. But I forced myself to push the door open. The bell jingled overhead in that same hollow note. Outside, a wind had picked up, swirling dust across the tarmac. My Jeep sat under the flickering lamp. The station sign buzzed, spelling out Johnson's Fuel. I hurried to my car, hopped in, exhaled a shaky breath. It was only after I started the Jeep that I decided to glance at the receipt. The overhead lamp inside the vehicle let me see the details. My eye skimmed the text, noting Johnson's Fuel across the top, the scribbled total, Tom's spidery signature. Then the date. My throat clenched. It read, September 22nd, 2010. That was exactly a decade prior to the current date. This was 2020. Something must be off, I thought. A misprint or old stationery. But an uncomfortable knot formed in my gut. I also noticed a faint smoky odor clinging to the paper, like old ash. I told myself it was just an error. But as I stared at the slip, I noticed another line, attendant number 4, Thomas H. Next to it, in faint letters, time, 8:45 p.m. The pen's ink was fresh, but everything else about the slip was not. I forced a laugh, telling myself maybe the old forms hadn't been updated. I stuffed the receipt into my pocket, trying to quell the goosebumps creeping up my arms. I pulled out of the station, tires crunching gravel. The headlights swept over the building's front windows. Inside, I saw Tom standing still as a statue behind the counter. He never turned out the lights, never moved. Then I hit the highway, pressing the gas. The tension in my chest eased with each passing minute. Soon, the station was just a distant glow in my rearview mirror. I tried to forget it. But that night, in a cheap motel, curiosity gnawed at me. I fished the receipt from my pocket. The date glared at me, September 22nd, 2010. 10 years to the day, from my current date of September 22nd, 2020. This was no normal oversight. A sense of foreboding seized me. Should I Google Johnson's Fuel or Tom gas station attendant? My phone's battery was nearly dead, and the Wi-Fi at the motel was spotty. Tiredness overcame me, and I decided to handle it in the morning. Except morning came, and so did a swirl of errands and meetings. I tried to set it aside. But every time I rummaged in my jacket, that slip would appear, the date mocking me. After a few days, my curiosity won. I took an hour off, found a local library near my new job site, and jumped on a computer. Searching for Johnson's Fuel, Trucker Route 17, and Tom Attendant. It took a bit of digging, but eventually I found an old news article from 2010 referencing a tragedy, a massive fire that had destroyed a small gas station named Johnson's Fuel, located on Route 17, dated September 22nd, 2010. My blood ran cold. I read on, heart pounding. Late night blaze consumes station, kills 3 employees, 2 customers. Investigators suspect fuel leak caused catastrophic explosion. Victims included Thomas Harrington, age 24, last known employee on shift. My eyes blurred. That name, Thomas Harrington. Tom. The station burned to the ground exactly 10 years ago. Yet I had visited that very station. I'd spoken to Tom. I stared at the library screen, mind reeling. Could the station have been rebuilt? The article said it was a total loss. Maybe it was rebuilt and never updated the date forms. But the article's last lines hammered into me, the property remains condemned. No plans for rebuilding. No. That station shouldn't exist. Tom was dead. But I'd seen him. Talk to him. My throat constricted. The receipt in my pocket felt heavier than lead. It smelled faintly of smoke. I felt an urge to throw it away, but also a compulsion to keep it, as if it were a clue in a puzzle I never asked to solve. Days turned to weeks, that slip never leaving my jacket. I'd dream of flickering flames, a young man's face half lit by neon. The date September 22nd, 2010 loomed in my nightmares. Then, one night, I got a call from an unknown number. I normally ignore such calls, but something compelled me to pick up. A static-laced silence greeted me. Then a faint voice, nearly swallowed by white noise, "Cole, help, my name." I froze. "Who is this?" I demanded, hard hammering. The line crackled, then died. I hardly slept. The next morning, as I rummaged for coffee, the receipt fell from my jacket. The swirling text at the bottom, Thomas H., seemed darker, as if the ink had grown bolder. My nerves frayed. Finally, I made a decision. I would drive back. Something in me insisted that if the station was truly gone, I'd at least see the empty lot. If it was somehow still there, maybe I'd find answers. So, on a Saturday, I got in my Jeep and retraced my route, heading toward that cursed stretch of highway. The farmland gave way to rolling hills, then to a lonely stretch of road. I scanned the horizon for that battered neon sign. For a while, I saw nothing but empty fields. My heart sank. Maybe I'd conjured it in a half-asleep delirium. Then, as dusk settled, my headlights fell upon a short gravel approach, leading to an open area. I slowed. The station was nowhere in sight. Instead, a charred foundation. My stomach lurched. Under the fading daylight, I could see blackened concrete, twisted remains of metal beams, lumps of melted plastic. This was all that was left, a ruin. I parked, stepping out onto scorched earth. A sign lay toppled, the letters John, ends F, L barely visible. Wind rustled the weeds that had grown among the rubble. My pulse throbbed in my ears. So the station truly was gone. Yet I had been here weeks ago, in a place that looked brand new. I walked around the perimeter, noticing stunted shrubs, scorch marks on the ground. My boots kicked up ash. The entire site reeked faintly of burnt chemicals, even after a decade. Fear gnawed at me. I'd met a ghostly attendant, purchased real gas that fueled my Jeep. How? Amid the broken remnants of an outer wall, I spotted a metal sign half buried in debris. With effort, I pried it free. The date stenciled read 1977, referencing the station's original opening. It was warped from heat. My breath trembled. The sun sank further, painting the sky with bruised reds and purples. A wave of dread told me I shouldn't linger after dark. But another part of me needed closure. Then, the wind picked up. A whisper of smoke drifted past my nose. My head snapped toward the rubble. Did I imagine a faint glow? As if an ember still smoldered under the ruins? My heart kicked. The day's last light faded. I realized how alone I was out here. No traffic on the highway, no phone signal. The hair on my arms prickled. The air had changed, grown heavier. With trembling hands, I dug the receipt from my jacket pocket. The date glared, September 22nd, 2010. Beneath it, I now saw faint letters that read, "Free me." Shock stabbed me. That wasn't there before. The words were so tiny, as if ghostly handwriting had emerged from the old carbon paper. My fingers shook. "Tom?" I whispered, feeling absurd. "Thomas Harrington?" Silence. The wind hissed across the rubble. But then, a subtle movement in the corner of my eye, a shape, half-formed, near the blackened pump island. My chest constricted. It was a silhouette of a man in a pale uniform, features blurred by the gloom. My mouth went dry. The silhouette raised an arm, beckoning. My heart thundered. "What do you want?" I croaked. The shape's lips moved, but no sound emerged. Then a swirl of ghostly flame flickered around him, a brief spark of orange light illuminating a pained expression. I recognized Tom. The same face from the station. Only now, it was twisted in agony. He parted his mouth in a silent scream, then flickered out. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. A wave of sadness overwhelmed me, mingled with terror. Tom was stuck here, a victim of the fire, his spirit reaching out. But how? Why me? My mind spun. The receipt's new message, "Free me," burned into my thoughts. Maybe he wanted closure. Something about his death needed resolution. My chest felt tight. Desperate, I rummaged among the rubble, searching for. I didn't know. Something to free him. The article mentioned the cause might have been a faulty pump, a neglected safety measure. Did Tom blame himself? Or was he pinned inside that station, forced to replay the moment forever? My foot knocked against twisted metal that might have been the main pump line. Another step, I found a half-melted name tag, Tom. My breath caught. This had to be his. As I held that scorched name tag, a gust of wind roared across the lot. An eerie moan sounded, like 1,000 voices in lament. My body shook with primal fear. Then I saw him again, or a flicker of him, arms outstretched. The twisted remains of the store flickered with ghostly flames, as though reliving the fire. My mind reeled. I wanted to run, but guilt and pity rooted me in place. If Tom's spirit was calling for help, could I do anything? The receipt in my hand heated up, the letters glowing faintly. I recalled a story I once heard about burning a personal item to release a spirit. A sense of necessity seized me. I pulled out my lighter, an old habit from my smoking days, and set the name tag on a chunk of concrete. Heart pounding, I flicked the flame. The plastic edges ignited, curling and releasing a dark smoke. The wind whipped it away. I pressed the receipt to the flame as well. The paper curled, blackening, the date consumed by flickers of orange. For a moment, the ghostly flames around the station mirrored these real flames, like an echo. Then, I heard a muffled pop, and a rush of air that nearly blew out my lighter. The silhouette of Tom appeared a final time, his expression shifting from pain to relief. The ghostly blaze around him winked out, leaving the night sky suddenly calm. My heart hammered. I stood, gazing at the last embers of the name tag and receipt. The air felt lighter, the oppressive hush lifted. Had I done it? Freed him from the endless loop? Trembling, I retreated to my jeep. The ruin was now just a ruin, silent and unremarkable. No flicker of phantom lights. I drove away, hands shaking on the wheel, tears burning in my eyes. I'd never been one to believe in ghosts or curses, but I couldn't deny what I'd seen. Thomas Harrington, had reached across time, handing me that receipt as a plea. For days afterward, I was haunted by subtle reminders, the scent of ash in my Jeep, fleeting glimpses of someone in my rearview mirror. But as weeks passed, those signs faded. Perhaps Tom had truly found rest. I revisited the library, rereading the article. I discovered a smaller follow-up piece from a year after the fire, referencing how the families of the victims never found closure. The station's owners had declared bankruptcy, no compensation paid. The families erected a small memorial plaque near the highway. Intrigued, I visited it. The plaque had 5 names etched, including Thomas Harrington. I said a quiet prayer, leaving a small bouquet, hoping that might add to his peace. I never again found that station. On subsequent trips, I'd passed the same stretch of road, but there was only the charred foundation. No flickering neon sign, no occupant in a pale uniform. Yet I felt a deep resonance each time, like I'd glimpsed a fracture in reality, a door that opened once, allowing a restless spirit to reach out. That battered receipt, dated 10 years past, was proof enough for me. Though I'd destroyed it, the memory lingers. Sometimes, at night, I dream of Tom, standing behind a counter, handing me a slip of paper. In the dream, the station walls burn around him, smoke curling from the ceilings. He mouths, "Thank you." I wake with tears on my cheeks, both relieved and melancholy. Because while I like to believe he's free, I wonder how many other spirits remain trapped in their final moments, awaiting someone, anyone, willing to see them and help them cross over. Life continued. I told no one about my ordeal, fearing mockery or pity. The memory became a personal burden and a quiet blessing. Because from that day on, I learned not to dismiss the unexplainable. If the living can carry regrets, perhaps the dead can, too. And if they find a way to send a message, like a gas station that stands as it once was, manned by a ghost who never left his post, maybe it's our duty to answer. That's the story, anyway. Some nights, my rational mind tries to rewrite it as a trick of exhaustion, a confusion of memory. But deep down, I know the truth. My Jeep was running on gas I'd bought from a station that no longer existed. I spoke to a man who died a decade prior. He gave me a receipt with a date that matched his death day. And I can't deny that. If you're reading this and ever pass an abandoned site, maybe an old store, a shuttered diner, or yes, a burned-down station, pay attention. Sometimes, places that should be gone linger for a reason. Sometimes, the dead need help finishing their final transaction. As for me, I still keep an eye out on lonely highways. I watch for flickering neon signs that appear where they shouldn't, for quiet attendants with sorrowful eyes, for a sense that time and space have folded. And if I ever see Tom again, or any wandering spirit, I'll be ready with a lighter, a prayer, and a willingness to carry their message, because, in a world full of roads, not every path leads to the living. Some roads circle back to the past, to the tragedies that never fully died, waiting for someone to pay the last bill and set them free.